Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much. What I want to do now is basically do a survey of issues and topics that we discuss within our research group of music and emotion. Ideas that we studied together, we had people discussing, we had a lot of conversations between us, and this is a subjective summary, because I'm sure other people would come up with stresses on other topics and issues. But this is going to be also a summary in which I leave some open questions for us to discuss in future meetings and to elaborate more. Let me start with this amazing picture, which is a flute found in Germany about 2 or 3 years ago, which dates back to 35,000 years. 35,000 years is so old that we cannot even surely attribute it to the Homo sapiens. The Neanderthal still lived in various parts of Europe and also in Germany, and it could well be a flute that was played by Neanderthals. But the fact that a musical instrument which looks very much similar to a flute that we can see today existed 35,000 years ago suggests that evolution has a lot to do with the way we perceive music, the way we think music, with the way we develop emotion about music. And indeed, much of the argument, or much of the thinking about music that we have conducted here, especially at least some of us, definitely the computer scientists or the brain researchers among us, like Talma, like Tali, think in this way, are some of the much of the argument are evolutionary. So what I'm going to do first, I'm going to sort of survey claims that have been appear in the literature, coming basically either from psychologists, the brain researchers, but also musicians, musicologists, about the source. First of all, there are basically two questions to ask here. The first question is, why do we enjoy music? And the second question, which we are debating a lot among us, and Michal's question to you was part of it, is how come we develop emotions out of sound? This is a very puzzling question for us. So first of all, about joy, and the overall, the general answer to this question is that we enjoy what used to be, at least what used to be good for us when we were developed at the evolution stage of our development. Okay, for instance, we enjoy chocolate because at early time of at the time of hunt and gather, where we lacked fat and protein and sugar, we had to store. It was a matter of life and death for us to store every piece of food that contained these elements, and therefore we develop attraction to these substances. And these attraction remain today in the form of enjoying chocolate. And a similar argument could be given to the question why we enjoy music. But the answer, but the specific answer varies from one researcher to another. So there is, this question was already discussed by Darwin, and Darwin's argument was courtship. We use music to become more sexually attractive. And he compares it to all sorts of courtship performed in rituals by mammals and birds. And this, in his view, this is our way to engage in sexual relationship, at least at the beginning of the sexual relationship. And some researchers took this quite seriously. For instance, Geoffrey Miller had conducted research in which he was trying to bring evidence to Darwin's explanation by tracing the period of productivity of musicians. So he went over lots of jazz musicians and 19th century musicians, mainly composer, and he found out that most of their careers, the concentrated part of the great pieces that they wrote was at the peak of their fertility period. Okay? Evidence, you call it. I don't take it as a very strong evidence. We know that cognitive ability is affected by age in various ways other than period of fertility, but that's an evidence he brings. Steve Brown's is saying we like music today, but because it was an essential tool of communication when we developed ourselves as a society. And he's claiming that it's actually that music and singing preceded language. Okay? We started to communicate by means of music, and then there was even a transition stage in which we used words and melodies together, sort of singing to each other, where language was undeveloped. And gradually we moved towards a language, a fully formed language. And during this process, we neglected basically music as a tool of communication, but we still enjoy it because it had such enormous importance for us in the evolutionary stage. Okay, this is a fascinating explanation, very hard to prove or very hard to bring evidence of any sort. I wish we had iPhones or something to be able to record it at 30 or 40 or 100,000 years ago. This is what Reuben Dunbar says. It refers to this behavioral activity by monkeys, which is called grooming. You know, when they sit together in a group and touch each other. There's evidence that this is an important channel of communication between the apes, and he's bringing arguments to claim that in fact music was developed when our communities grew up to more than 60 individuals. These are monkeys live in very small communities. As we enhanced our communities, even before the Homo sapiens, we needed to develop a remote communication. And the remote communication, instead of touching, was to deliver voice. And this is how singing, or how, so now from this point, he's taking the approach of the other person we mentioned and says we started singing before we actually started talking. The other explanation, which has more evidence and I like better, is one we discussed a lot and is basically to Tali Tishby, who is sitting here, which is that music is what make us enjoy in music is, and we mentioned it here, is the balance between the familiar and the surprising. And much of our joy in music is about recognizing structures. Okay, recognizing structure has two sources of joy. First of all, when we have a complex structure, this is way of I'm interpreting Tali's explanation. structure, structure is something opposed to randomness. We are afraid of randomness. Randomness in life is something that we try to escape from. And therefore we are attracted not only, by the way, in music, but also in various figurative arts like painting, like sculptures and things like that. We are attracted to this to structure. If Michal asked how do you define beauty, there are some very incomplete aspects in beauty that have been traced to bring a response of feeling beauty. Of course, incomplete, but one of them is symmetry. Symmetry is regarded since ancient time as a source of beauty because it's part of a structure. We recognize a structure. But the advantage is not only recognizing a structure, is that it trained us in being able to learn our surrounding, okay? When we hear music, we constantly have an expectation. We heard the phrase and we are expecting something will happen in the next note. And when the note is heard, then it's a relief. This is expectation are confirmed and we get the dopamine, okay? It doesn't mean that a very simplistic music will be more attractive, because at some stage it's going to be boring for us to see that our expectations are being confirmed. So we are asking for bigger challenges, and bigger challenges is to be able to confirm an expectation which is more surprising. I think this is bring me back to your example on the cake cutting mechanism. It's the simple, just to cut it is not beautiful because it's too simplistic. There's something unexpected in the mechanism that you describe. Also in the second prize auction, when I describe it to students without telling the argument first, it says that's crazy. Why a seller should do it? I mean, it's why should he be settled with the second prize rather than getting the first prize? The first prize is higher. And there is something, I think what we enjoy when hearing the argument is or even more so when discovering the argument, is that there was expectation that there will be something behind it, and the expectation is confirmed. However, nevertheless, repetition in music is a very important instrument, and to some extent, it defines music. I found over the internet a very nice voice clip that describes, it starts with with a sequence of verbal words, and then repetition of these words. And it really gives us a feeling when the repetitions occur that the person is moving from speaking to singing. I'll let you hear it, but it's basically tell us that repetition is to some extent defines what we are calling music. So pay attention to this. So it starts with speaking and then repetition. Can you get me voice here? Okay, maybe. אני חושב שזה יגיע גם בלי. Okay. Thank you. No, it's not point. Okay, we'll skip it. No? Okay. Talia, remember to tell Daniel that he screwed up on me here. Okay. Never mind. But let's now ask a question about more specific to emotion, which is how does music affect our emotion? And in particular, which is also something we discussed in one of our meetings, how can we enjoy melancholic music? What makes music, what distinguishes between music that we feel is, let's say, sad to one which is cheerful, which is happy? How does music dictate specific emotions? It's a very hard question, because we're more capable of answering this question with respect to painting, for instance. This is Picasso painting in his blue period, which we all would agree reflect sadness or misery, or call it or agony, or call it whatever you want. And the way we reflect to it is by now pretty much known. There are very nice experiments in neuroscience using fMRI, for instance, in which subject is viewing somebody who is running, okay? Another human being who is running on a video clip, and what turns out to happen is that the areas in the brain which are responsible for the motoric impulse for running are being activated. Okay, and recently this also was obtained with respect to emotions. For instance, if you see somebody terrified, then it activates parts of the brain, for instance, the amygdala inside the insula, very internal parts of the brain that are responsible for fight and flight. Okay, and this is coming from something we call empathy, and the importance of empathy is that you can relate yourself to what other people. This is a very important aspect of learning. If you see somebody is in a state of panic or fear, there's something which is happening around, and you should be taking a notice as well. And by looking at this picture, it reflects through this what sometimes called the mirror cells. We share the feeling with this person. Actually, it's not a living person, but there is a figure to relate to. But how do we relate to music? When we say the music is sad, what do we mean by that? Do we mean that the composer was sad when he wrote the music, or that the performer was sad when he performed it? Or is it me, the listener, who is sad? Or maybe the loudspeakers that deliver?
Expression of sadness.
It's expression of sadness.
The objective expression.
Okay. And there's something which is more abstract. When the literature, both the issue is actually handled very widely by both psychologists and philosophers, and they tend to make a very sharp distinction, as you said, Michal, between expressive emotion and representative emotions. Or sometimes it's been termed felt emotions versus perceived emotion. And to understand what the difference between the two, I can demonstrate it very well, I think, with an experiment that was conducted recently, okay? So what they did, they took individuals and let them listen to pieces of music of various types, some very very energetic, very happy, very some pieces that's supposed to make you glad, and others that are much more melancholic. And then they asked these subjects two types of questions. One type of question was, what do you feel when you hear this music? And the other type of question is, what do you think other people feel when they hear this music? Or sometimes they ask, what do you feel the composer, what do you think the composer felt when listening to this music? And what they found out is, which is partly explains the source of our joy from melancholic music, is that the answer to these two questions were very different. In the sense that the answer to the first question, the individual alluded to positive emotions, at least what we regard positive emotions. And when asked about what other people feel, he talked about negative emotion. For instance, when asked, what do you feel? He used words like compassion, mercy, merciful, compassion, love, empathy, and so forth. And we asked what other people are feeling. He mentioned sorrow, agony, sadness, and so forth. Okay? So we tend to experience, when we ask ourselves, positive emotion even when the music is melancholic. Still, what's the source of joy? This is still a very unresolved question. This is something I personally would like to know more and to devote more time between us to discuss in our future meetings. There's one interesting proposal made by brain scientists in relation to prolactin, which is a hormone known to be used as that is released in cases of sadness, which have a function of reducing your sadness, actually protect us in cases of sadness or agony against falling into depression. And so it gives us a sort of temporary high as a response to our to the sadness that we experience. And what they did is that they basically again played melancholic pieces of music to subjects and measured the content of prolactin. And what they found out that those individuals which associated pleasure with the music had a higher level of prolactin. And basically the idea is that in a music, although the music, and this is also applies to all many other types of art situation that we experience, including, for instance, you may of course ask yourself, and we discussed it in the past, how can people enjoy sad movies, right? How can people enjoy these Almodovar horrible? And we enjoy it. I mean, people who tell you, it was very interesting. It was a deep film, but I can't say I enjoyed it. There's a bit of hypocrisy here. Movies that we don't enjoy, we walk out of. Yes.
Because we feel that we are not alone.
To some extent, we feel that we are not alone, but what they explain is that what happens is that at the same time when the prolactin is being released, we figure out that the mental state that was created is a very temporary one, because it's not real. We go back to our state zero, okay? And that allow us to, yeah, it's virtual. There's another interesting research that shows that music really does something to us in way of changing our emotions. And these are people who basically showed individual faces of other individuals, all sorts of faces, starting with somebody laughing, bursting of laugh, to somebody who is crying, and also mid-range type of faces, at the same time when they heard melancholic music, or after hearing what we call sad music, and also comparing it to the case where the music was sort of happy, and the entire distribution, and ask for each face to give a mark between 1 and 10 about the extent by which this person we're looking at is happy. Okay, and you could see a shift of the entire distribution. Okay, comparing happy music, so it does make any effect of us, especially when we have to view somebody else's mental state. It relates actually to the difference between perceived emotion and experienced emotion. Now, one way to think about the source of influence of music on us is really to go back to the music that we can generate without any instrument. And we all can generate music without any instrument. There's some people here who are doing it professionally. And what I mean is singing. And it's going to be quite revealing to ask ourselves, what's the difference between the voice that we use when we are talking, and about compared to the voice when we are singing, and the difference is quite eminent. Okay, singing typically use a higher average intensity relative to talking. It not only involves higher average intensity, it also involves a higher variance of intensity. We shift from high to low. Same thing with frequency, higher variance of frequency. Singing makes a greater use of our lungs capacity compared to talking. Singing using a greater resonance. We once discussed, I think, this issue. I think you mentioned that when at some stage during during the song there is a huge gap in the frequency. When you move to a higher resonance, it triggers an emotional reaction. Okay, and singing uses it much more than talking, and it's startling that the two most extreme emotional reactions of human, namely laughing and crying, sound much more like singing than like talking. Okay, based on these comparisons, when we laugh and cry, we do something which sounds much more like singing than talking. And crying, more specifically, crying, or not even crying, but our tone of speaking in time when we are emotionally excited, like sad or feared, sound much more like music, and there is the way to recognize it is by asking ourselves another question, interesting question, which is what distinguishes different music that give rise to different emotional valences. Okay, for instance, happy music versus sad music. It's the intensity, it's the tempo, It's the rhythm and the tonality. For instance, very sad music is usually associated with minor, and happy music with major. Sad music has a lower intensity, a more moderate tempo, and a slower rhythm. And this is, if you record people, and this is, I think, is quite quite universal. If you record incidents when people speak when they are emotionally excited in a negative way, it will sound more, it will be more similar to, in terms of these variables, to what we regard as sad music than I will mention in a moment why, than happy music. There's a nice experiments in which they try to do it not with weeping or crying, but identifying the different elements that make us distinguish between a happy music and a sad music. And in these experiments, they confronted the subject, some of the subject, with mixed or polar features, like, for instance, taking the intensity of a sad music with the rhythm of happy music, or major music played with a very moderate tempo and low intensity. And people are completely confused when they ask whether the music is happy or sad, right? They simply cannot make sense out of it. Okay? A related thing which we also, by the way, and this give me an potential idea which is not easy to implement, but I think it's an interesting research idea. Dogs recognize human emotions through their voice, and the way they recognize their owner being sad is by the intonation of the voice. And they can do it much better than us humans. And maybe maybe it would be a good idea. And one experiment that was conducted is that to verify it is that they also have the effect of empathy and cell mirror. And when you can take a dog, that was actually done, you can take a dog and put him in the fMRI and scan his brain while his owner is talking to him. And when the owner is talking to him, when he's in a state of mind of agony, you will see the reaction triggered in the dog's brain. Okay? And it would be interesting to see whether there is a relation between the effect of music, whether music triggers the same type of reaction in dogs, whether his owner, after listening to a sad music, can trigger the same reaction to a dog that hears an agonized owner. I think it's an enormously fascinating tool to do research with, and I'm just throwing it to the air. The other thing which is related to it, and we discussed also, is the connection between music and gesture and movement. Gideon is not here, but Gideon is very much into this explanation that actually what happens to us when we hear music is that although we might stay still and don't move, there are constantly movement in our body, virtual movement, which we feel. We actually feel them. We may not pay attention to them, but they're there. And try to do music in Google and get pictures out of it. You always see notes being displayed in some dynamic feature. Okay, and indeed, music is a very dynamic experience. It's unlike painting, for instance. It's something that moves. It's something that develops, evolves. Okay, and the way we react in our life in way of movement is also very much affected by emotions. Okay, our emotions define to some extent our movement. If we are depressed or feel bad or tired, our movements are much more slow and much more moderate. If we are happy and very energized, we have much sharper type of movement, much faster, much more energetic. And this carries through to music. Okay, so a very slow music, which we could associate with a very slow movement, triggers the same kind of emotions that trigger with us when we don't have music, triggers the slow movement. Okay, one suggestion for us maybe. Let me also mention Ronnie's experiment, which we conducted here, and I want to suggest another experiment with relation to this. One of the experiments that we did, we haven't yet checked it. In order to experience the emotional effect that music does to us, we had Sarig and Michael performing. These two professional flute players performing to us an amazing short concert. And Ronnie asked all of us, before the concert was carried out, to write a very short 5 lines of a poet, lyrics, right? And after the concert, without us being prepared to it, she asked us to write again. We didn't know that she will ask us to write again anything, but she asked us to write again 5 lines of a poet. And she holds all these poets with her, and I had the opportunity to look at them. They look very different. They look very different. One thing she's going to do is to ask her student, that's why we ask for your permission, her student to sort of guess out of, through various questions, which is more emotional, which is more individual, more intimate, more personal, more based on creative, right? And see in a more controlled way whether there actually an effect to the listening of music. But we can, what I suggest is we can do something like this, not with us because we are already biased, but with students, letting them identify a piece of music only by one movement. Many movement would be too easy for other people to recognize. But give them a short piece of 1-2 minutes, and then ask them to demonstrate one movement with their hand or with their body that characterize this music, and then let other people watching the movement and see whether they are capable of matching between the movement and the music. If we ask them to do a full dance, it would be very easy, of course, but I suggest it could be that people will be able to recognize even by means of a single movement. Okay, finally I want to say a last few words about the social role of music. This is something that I discuss a lot in my book, Rational Emotions. This is the idea of collective emotions. Emotional reaction often intensify in a group of environment. Okay? The reason why it happens is that they generate group cohesiveness and solidarity by means of signaling commitment. I'll give, very soon I'll give examples, but when we are in a group, especially when the group is threatened by another group, it's almost a question of survival for us to demonstrate commitment toward one another, to show that we are not going to behave selfishly, that we are going to protect our friends, our group members, okay? And the way it's being instigated is by means of creating joint emotions. I'm talking in my book about experience of my dad during the Nazi time, where his uncle came one day completely sweat by admitting that he was walking on the street, coincidentally saw a Nazi rally, was curious about what's going on there, stood with the audience listening to Adolf Hitler making his speech, and suddenly he realized that he physically could not prevent it. He joined them by calling the Sieg Heil. It was so ecstatic that he, knowing that he's doing something completely wrong, he could not resist it. And there is much less severe cases that are triggered either by, military march, for instance, national hymns, are all meant to create this cohesiveness and solidarity within the group. And what they actually do is that they coordinate our emotions. I didn't mention it before, but our joy for music is very subjective. We interpret music differently, and this is obvious. We relate to experiences that we had in the past and so forth. But the purpose of these types of music, military marches and national hymns, is to kill the subjectiveness and to find a common denominator. And indeed, if you listen to this type of music, these musics are very simple, are very well structured. There's very little space for interpretation there. And the reason why there is a very little space for interpretation is that they are designed for all of us to feel the same. Okay? And indeed, that it does the job. Yes, Uri. The grave, yes. Okay, this is an amazing picture. There are lots of them. This was taken after the death of the former North Korean dictator. You could see thousands of people standing and crying and weeping. And if you ask me, they're not faking it. Many newspaper people wrote, that's a fake. If they don't cry, they will be executed and so on. It's bullshit. They are actually crying. And what makes them cry is the surrounding. It's a collective enterprise. And music, in many cases, help to induce this. There is a related phenomena of contagious laughter. Have you seen that? You can see people, there's some experiment with, you take somebody, a bunch of people waiting for the train, and somebody is taking out his cellular phone, hearing something, and then start laughing. The other ones are, they are nervous that the train is not coming. They're very, very serious, but he's insisting on continuing laughing, and then until somebody near him started smiling, a little bit smiling, and then she joins him in laughing, and sure enough, within two minutes, everybody, like 15 people, are bursting from laugh without really knowing what it's about. And you can't interpret it by any other way than claiming that it's a social phenomenon. We are socially, to some extent, programmed to react in this way, because we are gaining something of being part of the group. If you ask yourself why TV comedies often use laugh tracks in their show, right? What do we need with laugh track? It's not that to tell us exactly where the joke ends. It's to trigger us to laugh with the laugh track. And music often triggers us to enhance collective emotions because of this source of coordination. And I have now a student, a new student who want to do work on a very related topic. I'm advising her together with Jeff Rosenstein from the computer science department, and she's both musician and computer scientist, and she wants to develop a research program that uses coordination game to understand how music generate this type of coordination. Okay, and sorry,
It's
the rhythm.
the
Yes,
rhythm
the rhythm is part of it, but not all of it. Not all of it. I think I'll stop here. If you have questions, I'll be glad to address them. And in fact, you can address questions for both of us at this stage.
Eyal, I think it was a fantastic lecture.
Thank you very much.
I enjoyed particularly the review of neurophysiological findings in relation to music, which I suspect is one of the most complicated topics. And I am glad because in my perspective it highlights the importance of the human brain, and maybe also the animal brain in relation to music. That is that the value discussion is of two components: the sound and the human or animal brain.
Yes.
Provocatively, I don't think that music does much to this table. Okay? So there is a duality now, which brings me to the idea which was expressed before, or does the music expresses emotions? Does the sound express emotion? The emotions, obviously, they are in our brain, generally. They are not in the sound. The sound doesn't feel emotion. But sound has patterns, okay, which steer our emotions or affect our emotions. And that's why it shouldn't be surprising that all kinds of patterns can influence us emotionally. Because our emotional gamma, let's say, is endless.
Right. You're up. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So this is something
Yeah.
basic. Yeah.
You are absolutely correct, but I think it's not it's not specific to music. If you remember the Picasso painting that I showed you,
No,
it's
no.
also there that the picture is not sad. The picture is not sad. It's the reaction that the reflection of the picture, or what the picture does to our brain, that
But
creates the sadness.
what the pattern,
Yes.
series of sounds steers in our mind emotionally, and I would go. You said what is in the sound influences emotion. It's not only in the sound; it's in painting and so on and so
Yeah.
forth. And I would say in silence. In silence, there is no sound. In complete silence, people may be crying.
Yeah.
So there is an emotional pattern which couples with emotional patterns which are in our
Yeah,
brain.
the silence within the music is a very important element in creating the emotional, but it has to be within something. If I just ask you now to go out and
Depends what you carry in your mind at that particular moment or that particular
Clearly,
period in your life and so on and so forth. But one more word about the first lecture. What has in common music and economics? Just a small comment. I think at the technical level, it is true that they may have in common simplicity. They may have in common something quite opposite, complexity, so on and so forth. But I think what they basically have in common is that even economics, which is science, can steer emotions, emotions of beauty or emotions of sadness or elation and so on and so forth. On the other hand, that's why economics is science, because I think that the capacity of people to be emotionally steered by economic processes, as you are, or some of us may be, is not as commonly found, as the capacity to be steered by popular music. Unless, unless you have, or unless you have well invested shares or something.
Yes, please.
I'm interested in how much of your analysis you view as universalistic and how much of it is culture dependent, in particular, dependent on Western culture. Take, for example, issues such as tonality and other theoretical elements in music. Does everybody in every culture view minor as sad and painful and major as gay and delightful? I don't think so. And I'm aware of the differences between the receiver and the composer you didn't mention, and the audience, and the player, performer. But I don't know whether your group or your own thinking in this book have considered the relativity of a lot of these and it's interesting to think of which are universalistic possibly and which are much more culture dependent.
Right. Yeah. This is an excellent question that we have discussed. Obviously, not enough, and in fact, we are hoping to do more in it. And we're hoping to also incorporate to the group people who practice non-Western culture music. And about major and minor, I have no idea. So this may be maybe cultural, but I guess again I don't have a precise reference that the other features that distinguish between happy music, joyful music, and sad music, for instance, the rhythm would be quite universal. I would be very surprised to find a culture in which a very fast music, that changes very quickly, would be interpreted as a sad music. But indeed, it's a fascinating issue. Yes.
I don't know if you're familiar with Hans Jenny.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with Hans Jenny, who was a Swiss scientist about 50, 60 years ago, and he wasn't the first. Did some very interesting experiments with vibration, which is what music is. Mm-hmm. And because the human body is 70% liquid, he put membranes over very large speakers and in them put liquids of different kinds, powders, all sorts of things, and played different kinds of music. Mm-hmm. And he has an amazing book, which I would be very happy to lend you, it's enormous, of the photographs. And this is before the days of computers where people can change things with photographic programs, so it's all very honest. Showing the different patterns, fast music, slow music, sad, happy, classical as in Handel, Haydn, Mozart, and then Beethoven, and the different patterns. It's absolutely fascinating, and I think you might find this very useful for your group.
Excellent.
So I'll speak to you afterwards.
Thanks. Yes, thanks. Yes, Sarig.
Question for Professor Maskin. We talked about Hi. So we talked about financial models. I wonder if you can think about the financial models where a musician can actually earn more money.
It's a good one.
I'm afraid I don't have any useful suggestions there.
More questions? Yes, please. Yes, you wanted to say something, no? Okay. So here is the question.
Simple question to Professor Maskin. If the problem solving is so simple and beautiful, how come we human beings are not able to use them in the political way, and we are so confused all the time, trying to find simple solutions to solve problems between people?
That's a very deep question. That's a hard problem itself. But I think the difficulty in politics, it's actually a problem similar to the one that the parent faces when trying to divide up the cake. None of us have sufficient information to know what the right way forward is. But just because we don't have enough information doesn't mean that we don't have very strong views. And it's the conflict of rather ill-informed views that creates political conflict. I think that the best hope for resolving that kind of conflict is education. To the extent that we know more, we're less likely to clash politically. But you raise an extremely difficult question which doesn't have an easy answer.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. We look forward to seeing you in our meeting.